Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And in partnership with our good friends at IFC Films, we love our friends at IFC Films, welcome to the FOLCS film series. Tonight, the film No Man's Land. We have two real special guests, the director of the film and co-producer of the film, Conor Allyn, and the co-screenwriter and lead actor of the film, Jake Allyn. Note that they have similar last names, and if you're not seeing them yet on your screen, you'll see they're actually sitting together. So there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that in a second. So welcome. We're really excited. This film is really phenomenal. As many of you know who have been with us through the pandemic, we've really sort of tried to respond to this sort of distribution rabbit hole that films are in and give you advanced screenings of films that are worthy and should be seen and should now be screened. And this film is absolutely a sleeper in every way. You must tell your friends about it. You may remember the film that we showed over the summer, The Cuban, with Lou Gossett Jr. We had the director here as well, and we had Lou Gossett Jr. I read in Variety this week that Lou Gossett Jr. is predicted to get an Academy Award nomination. Remember, he won one many, many years ago for An Officer and a Gentleman. And we were the first ones to show that film. So I've already called them. If they win the Oscar, I will be with them that night. We're totally taking credit for that. It would not have happened without us. So the Allyn brothers, you know, you've come to the lucky shop.
Yeah, fantastic. You guys started to kick us off.
Yeah. Exactly.
And thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. If you're watching us live on Facebook, we know we have a large live audience on Facebook. Welcome, thank you. Sign up for our mailing list at folks.org, so you'll hear about future upcoming events. If you have questions for the Allyn brothers after the conversation, you can leave it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to some. And if you want to, some of you have seen the film because it was an advanced screening for a select group who could see it. But for those who haven't, you must see it, and the chat box provides links and information, and we'll talk about that again, about how one can see the film. So Conor, Jake, welcome to FOLCS. So thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
Let me just start. This is the kind of question I never ask. My board of directors will be mortified. Never ask this sort of question. You know, we're brainy and it's a big think thing here. But so I never ask like little biographies, but I can't help but mention that there's actually a third Conor. His name is Rob. The three of you have your own family production company.
Yeah.
So are you like the Manning brothers of filmmaking in Southern California? Was it?
We haven't gotten that one yet.
Yeah. Were you like one of those three little kids running around with cameras, putting everyone in movies? What was it like in the Allyn household, the three of you?
We definitely were running around making movies as kids. Yeah, we started really early. Jake and I, you know, grabbing our parents' home video camera and just doing our best with what we got and using the neighborhood kids, and we're strapping fireworks to our chests to do special effects and all kinds of dangerous, no good stuff that
heavy on the action.
I'm just curious, did Jake, since he starred in this film, did Jake want to be the actor and you wanted to be the director, or was there a reversal when it came to home movie?
We ever at that age, I don't know that we, you know, I don't know, depending on the makeup of your audience, you know, we're from Dallas, sort of, we're not from LA, not from New York. So like, you don't really grow up with filmmaking.
I get it.
Storytelling is like a job. That's not a real thing.
Yeah.
So I don't think we like realized that we were headed into this industry until we were already there. We just kind of did it because it was fun, and I turned a lot of school projects into movies because you know, it was more fun.
So I hope this doesn't upset Rob. Rob's not here. He's not disfigured or with a speech impediment. He's normal, because I just want to say he would have been welcome anyway, no matter what. Let him know we're very inclusive.
Yeah.
You guys are good looking, but he could be the outlier, right? So maybe he didn't want to show up.
No, he's even more handsome.
Okay. All right, well, let me just say a couple things. First of all, you know, it's very rare that people call me in advance of the event to say that they saw the film already and they loved it. We got a call from one of our good friends, Robert Wertheimer, who called the other day and said, this is an amazing movie. So that is a good sign, I think, that people were, there are people watching, but they already wanted to make it known how much they love the film. So I have, you know, it's an enormously interesting film in the fact that it's really a revisionist take on the cowboy Western. And I would also say it's a revisionist take on the cowboy revenge movie. By the way, you've come to the right place, because I'm sure you didn't know this, but I wrote a book on revenge.
Really?
And I talk a lot about revenge movies. So I know about this film in that regard. So can we talk a little about that idea of, now that I realize you're actually from Texas, it does seem to be, it is a Western film. It's a modern Western. It upends a lot of the presumptions that we think about cowboys. It upends a lot of the presumptions about cowboy Western revenge films. And by the way, in modern parlance, it upends all the presumptions about illegal aliens and Mexicans at the border. So can each of you briefly sort of step in on that, of whether that was part of the intention in thinking, because one of you co-wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly grew up, we grew up from Texas. We loved and revered Westerns growing up. My name is Jake because of a Kevin Costner movie, Silverado. His name was
I love
Jake
that. Yeah.
Movie, yeah. And he rode a paint horse. So there's, it's no mistake, or it's no coincidence that my character rides a paint horse.
Great.
It was definitely in our blood from day one. And we also grew up going to Mexico a lot as kids with our dad who worked in Mexico. And so we kind of figured our way into the Western would be this kind of reverse immigration story.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do a movie with this sort of social importance, that we're without taking sides, talk about this issue of immigration, do a unique take on it. And we felt like, in the sort of Taylor Sheridan kind of ways, is use a modern Western genre, sort of classic genre, to talk about a subject that's, can be highly politicized, and use that to allow us to not get sucked into the politics of it.
But even more, sorry, go ahead, Jake. Did you have something?
Well, and just to use those sort of some of the tropes and cliches of classic Westerns, lean into those, but then also subvert them in our own ways and give people, a dash of something they know, and some of those great cowboy tales, but then throw a twist into it that hopefully, people don't see coming.
Stereotypes as well.
Well, it's a huge twist if you think about it, right? I mean, the cowboys in some instances here are ambivalent about being cowboys. Wouldn't it be nicer to be a New York Yankee? Pay off our mortgage and we'll all join you in Manhattan, right? I mean, it's only one of the characters that seems to love it, the one guy that's going to go play AA baseball for the Yankees. So there's ambivalence about being a cowboy. There's even ambivalence about
how much longer can you be a cowboy? Is that even really it's part of Americana, but are there cowboys anymore? Is that kind of classic hero, can they exist any longer?
And there's an ambivalence about guns, right? Whether we use them, should we use them? Do we like to use them? The film does not give you a sense that these cowboys are comfortable with them or like them. And by the way, another thing that, again, this movie is a direct strike again, in reaching some of these motifs. The cowboy and the Indian, the cowboy and the Mexican gets completely upended, right? Good guy versus bad guy, very different, a much more emotionally complex depiction here of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And I just think you should be congratulated. I just wondered if you wanted to talk about those, because it's not just that you're from Texas. You really took aim at a lot of interesting tropes that we're not used to seeing. It reminds me not just of Taylor Sheridan, but Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, which is a really great, in my view, a very good revisionist Western that also takes aim at things that we thought you're supposed to have in a Western.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly tried to, usually in the Westerns, the person who is out for revenge is your protagonist, and you want them and you're rooting for them because they got wronged and he's going to set it right, and everything's going to be good after that, even if he has to kill a bunch of people to get there. And I mean, we have that storyline, except it's the Mexican father who's out for revenge, and it's our hero who's the one he's trying to get vengeance upon, and yet we don't want him to get killed either. So it sort of sets the audience up for sort of cross sympathies.
Well,
one challenge we tried to give ourselves was to make every character both good and bad. To go into that, revenge story that you mentioned, as Conor said as well, like it is usually the good guy versus the bad guys in Westerns. And, we really wanted to try to find something in the middle.
Also, I should say that, in thinking about audiences that would love or should love this movie, you should be thinking about an IFC about making sure that lawyers know about this film. Because, and I'll tell you why, because there is a theory of justice that is a very minority view, but this movie is all over. It's called restorative justice. The difference between retributive justice that's based on the principle of punishment and restorative justice that says, well, wouldn't it be better if we can repair relationships without punishment? And this film is just on top of that in an enormously interesting way.
There is a difference between, this sort of movies leading up towards this moment of is forgiveness possible? Is redemption possible? And I think we tried to balance that with like, okay, you can let maybe redemption is possible, but even if it is, it doesn't mean that you're forgiven by the wronged party, that doesn't necessarily hand in hand.
Yeah.
So what's, for those who have seen the film, we're just now tantalizing people to watch. Why does Jackson go south? Again, there's another revisionist take on the Western. I was talking to our producer, Olivia Simon, earlier, and I said, the both versions, including the novel True Grit, it's very clear in True Grit that the other marshals don't want to go after the killer because he's going into foreign territory, Indian territory, and only a crazy person would do that. Yeah. And so the girl needs to find a marshal with true grit, right, who's willing to do it. So in this movie called No Man's Land, the guy who's running away actually runs toward the Avengers, not away from. So maybe we can talk about, that's a brilliant take, unimaginable. I've never heard of Western try that. Tell me why he doesn't go, the guy should go play double. Now's the time to go to New York. Why is he going south?
I mean, I think, the movie is called No Man's Land because it takes place, or it starts in this place in Texas that's north of the Rio Grande, but south of any actual border walls. And the locals call it No Man's Land. But I think, after the moment of tragedy happens, my character Jackson is really in an emotional no man's land between taking responsibility for this, just listening to his father and trying to get out of it. You were talking about the law of all this. And sadly, there's a world in which people were on their property and you're in Texas, and that's a place where you're allowed to defend your property by any means necessary. And so there is a world that he doesn't go to jail for what happened, but he knows, somewhere inside of him, he did this and he's wrong, and he just doesn't quite know what to do with it yet. And I think he starts to go south just because he's afraid and he's scared of what's going to happen.
Do you think that
he finds some direction there?
Do you think that there's also that he rejects his father's alibi? Right? He simply doesn't, the father keeps saying, shut up, this is what we're doing.
I'm taking the blame for this.
Right, and he can't tolerate.
Certainly something we talked about this a lot, in the lead up to the movie and while we were shooting, because of course Jackson ends up going on this sort of epic quest to try to find redemption, but he doesn't know that he's doing that when he first runs away, when he first flees the law and runs away to old Mexico. So he hasn't made that connection yet, but I think it's that thing in your heart that tells you I've done wrong, and
it in your belly.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's his instinct as a human, is telling him that you got to go do this, and he doesn't even know what that is.
So for the audience that hasn't seen the film, and just to sort of set up some of these concepts more in terms of the plot, maybe you can also help explain the concept of no man's land, right? is the family's ranch actually in Texas, or is the ranch in no man's land?
Yeah.
If there is a gap, whatever that, because there is such a gap, right? Could you explain to the audience, there is such a thing in the Rio Grande where...
It's a really interesting concept, because I think people just, you know, despite the fact that so much gets talked about and written about and publicized about the wall and the border and everything, people don't really realize that, like, Trump's wall, there's been wall for 20 years since the first Bush. I mean, there's hundreds of miles of wall in Texas already. And for the most part, that wall is 20, 30, 40 miles north of the Rio Grande River, which is the actual geographic border between the two countries.
Yeah.
And so there's thousands of Americans, like the Greers, our hero family, starts our movie, that live in this strip of land that is south of the hard border wall and north of the river. So they're U.S. citizens, paying taxes, but there's no police that come south of the wall. The U.S., and this is a real thing, the U.S. Postal Service does not deliver. They need a passport in order to go to the hardware store, 10 miles north of their property. And they're dealing with a very real immigration issue of coyotes and narcos and stuff in their backyard, essentially. And they're on their own, which is a dangerous place for some people to be, and scary. And it really led us very easily into this frontier Western feel of our movie, because it's kind of like this there's this lawlessness to it. We start this movie, and they've kind of been forgotten by their country. No one's coming to help them. They're on their own.
It's an interesting irony then, given what you just said, because it makes me think that the scene in the bus where he tells what he thinks is a family joke about, my family says, our dad says that we're from Texas, not the United States. It's not even necessarily true they're from Texas.
Right. They're sort of not. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's sort of a paradox that they're so much in no man's land that they can't even legitimately be called Texans. And so they're in this precarious situation, because what I think is happening is that because Mexicans are trying to flee Mexico, they invariably have to occasionally pass through their land, right?
Yeah. So, and that's a very real thing. Whatever you feel about immigration, sometimes whether it's like narcos, or if it's just immigrants coming through people's property, they often will cut fences and stuff. And for the Greer family, that creates a real problem for them. They lose their cattle wander off, go into Mexico, and then that's thousands of dollars of loss for these people who really are in a position where they can't afford to lose anything.
Right. Well, good. I want to talk about that, because I actually later, hopefully, we'll get to this question about the family, because I won't tip you off yet, but I am interested in that. But again, it does, it overcomes so many of these presumptions, right? You said narcos. In this case, part of the family, the Mexican family, has a green card. Some of them actually speak English, right? They're not carrying drugs, right? I mean, everything that Donald Trump told us about Mexicans coming over is not in this movie, right? In fact, it happens several times in the movie that Jake makes the presumption that the person is illegal, and they're showing them, I have a green card and I speak perfect English. And it's very true. This movie speaks to that in a way that I don't know any film that's ever done that, as if to say, do you realize that some Mexicans have green cards when they're coming over? Do you know that they actually speak English? Do you not that all of them don't carry backpacks and some of them are not trying, they just want to get over to the other side.
We really tried to be even-handed. I think, and when you talk about a political issue, it's so easy for your own personal biases to get injected into the conversation. And what we wanted to do was do this unique take on immigration, but try not to politicize it. Try to tell the story, like Jake said, it's sympathetic on both sides, and be honest. There's good people north of the border, good people south of the border. There's bad people too on both sides, and just be true to that.
And there's an interesting twist to the illegal alien, because Jake, makes it south, right? As your character is Jackson, right? Just to be clear. Jackson, the character, is going south into Mexico. He speaks no English. He in Mexico is the elite. He's the he speaks no Spanish. I'm sorry. He's the illegal alien. He is mocked for being unwashed and dirty. You know, he doesn't speak the language. He's very desperate, right? The image that we have of the illegal alien comes to the United States. Jackson ends up depicting the very same thing of what is it like to be in Mexico with no proper ID, no language skills, and haven't had a shower in a long time. And he's being hunted, right? He's being hunted and he's haunted, right? I mean, it's just
haunted,
So, I mean, that is something that's, again, another twist that is, you know, remarkably different. What about the idea of fatherhood?
It also,
go ahead.
Some of the subtleties of that too is that, you know, obviously he's the gringo illegal alien who's gone south of the border, that's kind of our unique spin on this immigration topic. But then, you know, his experience, while in a lot of ways is maybe similar to, you know, a Mexican immigrant who's gone north, who's illegal, who, you know, doesn't speak the language and has to take a sort of menial job. But at the same time, you know, there's a sort of natural elements of white privilege involved too, where, you know, Jackson, his journey south is a little more, you know, not easy, but is a little more comfortable than the other direction because he's white. And he, you know,
people are going to take a little more interest in him.
Yeah, and people are more, you know, willing because of culture, because of his color of his skin and stuff, where he's from. People are willing to give him, you know, a leg up that maybe he wouldn't have gone if he was.
Well, the boy who we know gets killed, Fernando, you know, I mean, it's a very different treatment if the two boys are parallel stories, right? You know, one of whom, you know, gets shot and killed, the other, you know. But it's interesting too, the way the film humanizes Mexicans on that side of the border. It's not just that they have green cards, they have wealthy ranches. I mean, it's just sort of such a wonderful paradox that Jackson looks at the ranch and goes, wow, this is a cool ranch.
Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed that.
Yeah, wow, he comes out and he goes, hey, nice spread.
It's more impressive, you know, than what his home, which he was happy and loved his beautiful ranch at home. But I mean, the Mexican ranch he ends up working on in Mexico is more.
And although he begins, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think there's kind of another stereotype from the United States that believes that every single person from Mexico wants to and is actively trying to come north. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
And the ones that are coming north are often just sending all their money back home and don't really want to be here.
Yeah.
They want to do what's best for their family to give their child a better life. I think, you know, the Texas father, Bill Greer, played by Frank Grillo, you know, we were talking about him and he wants his son to go play for the Yankees. I think he loves his son. He'd love to have his son at the ranch every day, but he knows he's going to have a better life if he goes out and takes his shot, and he's willing to accept that in order to give his son a better life.
Yeah, but the father, you know, the Jackson's father, there's some very, you know, Andie MacDowell plays the mother. You know, it's clear that this family, you know, this is their family business, but they haven't had good luck at it, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting because Jackson wants to do it, and you kind of look at him and go, but why? This is not, you know, this is not Bonanza, you know, they don't have quite that kind of ranch. He finally sees that kind of a really cool Bonanza-like ranch in Mexico. Yeah. And it's interesting because you see the family, you know, Hardscrabble doesn't even begin to describe it. There's a lot of, you know, desperation. They are not, you know, they're not succeeding as ranchers. And yet you're right, as he ventures south, he sees people, you know, doing it frankly better. And the other thing is the kindness with which he's treated with a number of families that take him in. What was the thought there? I mean, you know, you don't really see Americans other than the fact that they took out guns, and ended up using them. And everyone else in the film is a fully humanized Mexican.
You know, that was just something that we experienced as kids a lot, getting to travel with our dad, was just the unbelievable welcome party that you get when you go to Mexico, whether it be someone's family, a family dinner. You said when you were scouting locations that just everybody just welcomes.
There's no, just a difference of cultures. It's not to say that our culture in America is necessarily cold and uninviting, because we should never paint with a broad stroke like that. But the Latin culture is just very warm. And yeah, like Jake was saying, when we went on location scouts in Mexico, no matter where we were going, and we were with a film crew, you're going into people's homes on short notice and stuff, to a house that we visited with a big old crew. We were always offered, a tray of lemonade and cut fruit, and and these were not rich people's homes that we were going to shoot in. But they were always offered that kind of thing. And I've done a lot of location scouts here in the US, and that's just not people more than happy to come. Oh yeah, I would love to be in a movie. Check out our house. But they're not necessarily going to like go cut up a bunch of fruit and bring it out to you. Yeah. It's just a difference in culture. And that's just in Latin culture.
Beautiful thing.
A stranger shows up at your house, let him in and you give him something.
What about the statement? The film makes some interesting statement about fatherhood. Both fathers, Gustavo, and I forgot the father's name, the American father's name. What's his name?
Bill.
Oh, Bill, right, of course. Yeah. So, what is it that they want for their children? And the things that they actually want actually end up backfiring, right? And so, there's both a sense of what I want to make better for my children, and yet fates intervene, and it ends up not working out in both cases, right?
Yeah, we really tried to set up this dual storylines of fathers and sons, and yeah, very similar. The wants of both totally similar, and yeah, they both backfire, and they end up realizing what was really important to them, and some of their own mistakes, along the way. And the Mexican father ends up in a situation where the kid who's wronged him sort of has come to him as a father to to ask his forgiveness.
Why do you suppose that, I think again another revisionist spin on the cowboy revenge Western, why is it in your mind that the Mexican father, Gustavo, doesn't really buy into revenge even when he says he does in the beginning? Like, it doesn't appear, no matter what he's saying, he is very ambivalent. Unless you don't read it, unless you didn't film it that way, or I'm misreading it. No, I see this very, very much more complex about, the Avenger knows that he has the moral duty to do this, and yet, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, we wanted him to struggle with it. I mean, we wanted him to be a full-fleshed human being, and the character that we had written, the backstory that we had created for Gustavo was not a man who has probably ever killed or kill easily. It's something, as a screenwriter, at least, if you're going to have bullets and guns in your movie, they need to matter. Each if you've ever heard a gunshot, it is so loud and powerful, and that was something we really wanted in this movie.
To change a life and change the course of someone's life.
If a bullet's going to come up, it needs to matter and be important.
And that's what happened here, right? I mean, there weren't many gunshots, but look at the impact that was left.
Yeah. I think there's two.
Two shots that seem to hit in really devastating ways.
Humans are really one thing I think we tried to capture in this movie is that humans are filled with contradictions. We think we're one thing, but maybe we're not, and or we desperately want something, but something else is totally contradictory to that, and somehow we're okay with that. Just as an aside on another project, I remember interviewing this really interesting woman. She was a cop whose husband had been murdered in the line of duty. She was also very, very religious, similar to Gustavo, and the Mexican father in our movie. And this female cop, she was 100% against. She was a Christian. She was against the death penalty, but in the case of her husband, she absolutely thought that the man who killed her husband ended up just getting 7 or 8 years in prison, and she thought that he should have been killed for his crime. And yet, she was against the death penalty. And I
Yeah.
remember interviewing her, and it was just very difficult. I was having difficulty digesting what she was telling me, but she wasn't putting on for me, you know, trying to pretend she was more Christian than she was. This was just her life, and she had gone through some struggles. And I think Gustavo is in a situation similar where he's a man of faith. You know, he's a man of God, and especially in Mexican, you know, Latin culture in general.
Yeah, Catholicism.
Catholicism is so ingrained into everyone, even the gangsters, you know, are good Catholics. And yet this kid from Texas had murdered his son. And so, yeah, he can be a good Catholic and desperately want revenge at the same time. And that awful contradiction is sort of leading him through this ambiguous path through the movie until he finally has to make a choice. Yeah. And you hope that he makes the right one.
What do you think goes into his decision to make a choice? Do you think that he knows this is in him the whole time, that that's the choice he'll make? Or do you think that he's even surprised by the decision that he ultimately makes?
I mean, I would think it's the latter, you know, that he, because I don't know, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we think we're going to do one thing, and then we get to the moment and then we just don't do it. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's part that, and part that, you know, when the two characters finally confront each other at the end of this movie, that he sees, you know, that the other party is trying to meet him halfway, and that sways him just enough that it changes the course, you know, the course of what could have happened.
Well, that's what I meant earlier about this film is almost like exhibit A for restorative justice. I mean, it really is for people in the criminal justice system who believe in restorative justice principles. This is a mandatory film to watch, because what it really speaks to is that the human encounter itself, by the way, in this film, it happens in a church of all places, but, you know, at a funeral, right? But that the human encounter can be so powerful, right? That it could change all of those, you know, vengeful, retributive wishes. If there's sufficient remorse. I mean, Jackson, and Jake does such a good job of this. This is a character that's 90% of the film in anguish. You know, he's just literally in anguish. And it's got that, again, it plays with these tropes, right? Like the silent cowboy, right? We know this. Cowboys they don't talk a lot, right? Yeah. So in this movie, you have a really young, anguished cowboy who doesn't even speak the language, and he can't even speak to what he's feeling, right? Yeah. And if he could, he wouldn't know who to tell. Right. I mean, it's horrifying, really. You really feel that for him.
And it's all happened very quickly as well. You know, after the tragic shooting, we're talking about the next couple of weeks of their life, maybe.
Yes.
You know, this is not 6 months later they meet again. You know, this is in the legitimate wake of tragedy. And yeah, I think, you know, that was again what we were talking about, where like every bullet matters, and like if you take someone's life, that's shattering, you know, and that needs to be important. And that was one thing we talked a lot about with both my character and the character of Gustavo, the Mexican father, is how do we pay tribute to what has just happened without just crying the whole movie, you know? And then that was something I thought, you know, Gustavo did wonderfully throughout the movie. The actor Jorge Jimenez was like, he never lost sight of that feeling of grief, guilt, and anger, while also showing, you know, dimensions and an arc.
This film has so many wonderful, lovely, small moments. Film is filled with lovely small moments. For instance, when the Texas Ranger, the Mexican, by the way, who's learning how to speak Spanish, even though he himself has lost touch with his heritage, nice twist. We might talk about that a little more. Says that he reads the note that Jackson wrote. And he picks out one word, contrite. Mm-hmm. And Jake, I don't know if you wrote that or your co-writer wrote that, but that was first rate. Just that he just mentioned the word, he says something like contrite that will weigh in your favor or something. That the ranger, again, normally the ranger is a guy, I got to get my man. I don't care how I get my man. He's not usually the guy that uses the word contrite.
Right. But
You know, that's not usually a line that they say, the Texas Rangers, never.
Yeah. I mean, again, you know, we were making a Western, we were making a chase thriller, but we wanted it to be about human beings. And ultimately, you know, a Texas Ranger who works on the border, that's just another human being who signed up for a job as well. And those people are, you know, incredibly conflicted about the border. A lot of times they're trying to do a job, but they're also trying to make sure people don't die on the border, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of George Lopez, who plays the Texas Ranger.
Shout out.
A great drama role for him. He did such a good job of this, is having this arc where you know, we all have these biases, and at the beginning of this movie, you know, he sizes up Jackson in about 2 seconds and, you know, sees him for what Jackson is at that moment, which is, you know, maybe a naive racist kid who killed someone else, you know, and didn't need to. But by the end of the film, as he's tracked Jackson through Mexico, you know, he's learned to respect this young kid, even though he's done this horrible thing. And
now, is that why he chose? It's an interesting plot twist. Is that why he agreed to go get him? Because again, you normally, you know, it's like True Grit. Most of the people who have that job do not want to go into foreign territory. It's too dangerous. And this guy, although is a Mexican, doesn't speak Spanish. Why does he do it?
I think he's trying to protect. I mean, he doesn't like, you know, doesn't necessarily like Jackson at that moment, but he sees that he's a naive kid, and he knows that if Jackson goes over to Mexico, it's dangerous. He just killed somebody. Like, you're gonna get hurt real bad.
And I think there's guilt all over this movie with all the characters for different reasons, and I think there's definitely that feeling with the Texas Ranger character, because he shows up, scares Jackson off. Jackson goes to how he can get away, which is crossing the river on horseback. And like you said, you know, the Texas Ranger knows that you can get killed over there. And if Jackson does show up dead, that's going to be on him.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's so many, again, sweet moments. You know, he comes from a family that seems to be a loving family, but they don't understand him. You know, the movie feels like Jackson is like the sensitive poet, you know, that he really is, you know, he likes ranching, of course, but if he wrote a book of poems, it wouldn't shock me. So that's
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
No, that's how I perceived him. But it seems like he, in the arms of the Mexicans who don't even know him, they seem to respond to him in a way with more sensitivity. It is like almost an odd surrogate father and mother figures everywhere he goes, even though his family loves him. You know, It seems like there's a good reason why I wouldn't go home. Why would I go home? You know, what's there? Everyone here is so much nicer.
Yeah. No, there was definitely a part of us that wanted to show kind of the Jackson, even though he thinks so poorly of Mexico in the beginning.
Yes.
Mexico is kind of the place of his dreams and the place that he kind of pretends Texas to be. You know, when you were mentioning about him being in anguish so much, and one of the moments when he kind of comes out of that anguish, whether he knows it or not, is when he's kind of back working with horses.
Right, exactly, good.
Mexican horses don't speak Spanish or English. They're just horses, you know. And you know, I worked with a lot of Mexican cowboys on this movie to prepare for the movie and to just learn more about horses and ranching and cowboy stuff. And I forget sometimes my Spanish is not very good. Their English was not very great. Mm-hmm. And we spent 3 or 4 hours together every single day training and communicating and talking and getting to know each other. So how did that happen? You know, if I didn't speak their language and they didn't speak mine, I mean, you find a way, and we're just not that different from each other, even if we speak a different language or have a different skin color.
Yeah, and it happens several times in the film where someone, you know, has a gun on Jackson, and yet somehow he ends up communicating what he's trying to do, that he's not here to commit a crime, and that everyone, you know, people understand it. Again, there is this interesting thing about how, you know, the Americans are somehow portrayed as rushing for their guns first. And the Mexicans are slower at it and are willing to drop the guns faster. And it is sort of interesting. There's another question I have about that before I forget. Huck Finn, I love how you threw that in there. It was very smart, by the way, because you know, Huck Finn is on the run with Jim, the slave boy, and he's on the run for good reason. Mm-hmm. And so is Jackson.
And if, you know, I haven't actually read Huck Finn in a while, but if you take a look at that, and I actually was kind of forced to in this movie, was when we were reading it, was kind of looking at the chapters and like remembering what that book is really about. And Huck Finn is a kid who thinks slavery is normal and okay, and Jim's a slave, and that's how it's going to be. And it takes the whole course of the movie for this kid, Huck, to figure out that, wait, something's wrong here. This is not right. I think we want a similar...
and that he knows internally what's right.
Yeah.
You know, despite, you know, again, Jackson has the same thing. You know, he's
human.
Yes, he's human. He knows in his heart that his prejudices may be deep-seated, but they can be overcome. Right? If he sees the falsehood in those prejudices, and that's what this movie does. What about this idea of moral responsibility over legal responsibility? And I think this is an important point, that it seems like Jackson at some point realizes, I want to return this wallet, right? I mean, but I want to do more than just the return the wallet. I'm wondering what you think that journey to where he finally encounters Gustavo, the work that needs to get done for him to realize that it doesn't even make a difference right now whether this was self-defense or whether this was some other, you know, defined criminal act. There's something else here, an ownership, a personal ownership that I killed your son.
Yeah, we really, just like with politics, we did our best to avoid the sort of legalese of the conflict that got us there. So, yeah, you know, Texas is a right to bear arms state. Yeah. It's a stand your ground state. You know, like someone. The reality is, if someone was on your property and stabbed your dad with a knife, and you shot a kid in the melee, you probably not go to jail. But that doesn't matter. That's not important to Jackson and his soul.
Yeah.
And so we really, you know, we tried to put aside the politics, put aside the legal and technical legal aspects, and just tell a story about the humanity of the issue and the people in it. And that definitely had, you know, I think what you're saying speaks right to the heart of what we're doing, which was, you can't really show up to this guy whose son you've murdered and say, will you forgive me? But you can just take some ownership of the fact that you did it. And in our case, you know, he found
just show up.
Just show up. And you know, in our case, it was just like, this is yours, when he gives the boy's wallet back.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about, you know, when do you think Gustavo realized, you know, what choice he was going to make at the end of the film? And, you know, I wouldn't claim to speak for Jorge, the actor. He obviously made that choice. I think he did it great about when he decided or whatever. But, you know, personally, in the way we wrote it, it's how he shows up in those few moments that they spend together in the church. It's what Jackson brings with him and what he says or doesn't say that I think leads Gustavo to make his choice.
Well, it's interesting. You really nailed this other idea about forgiveness, because you're quite right. Jackson doesn't ask for it. Mm-hmm. And by the way,
that's really important to us.
And by the way, Gustavo doesn't actually give it to him, because the word is used in order to protect Jackson. Mm-hmm. It's so, I've never seen, and I have to tell you, I wrote a book about revenge. So let me tell you, you really threw me. I know a lot about this. This was fascinating. He doesn't do it, but when he says it, he doesn't say it for any other reason other than to protect Jackson. Right. It may not even be true, right? Yeah. He may not actually have done it, but it's something that he knows he needs to say to protect him. And I don't want to give away too much more of this, But it's actually very interesting how you did that. That forgiveness is not obligatory in this movie at all, and it isn't even come up really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we wanted to have Gustavo, whether he really ever gives it or not, and which, as you say, is sort of, you know, that's left to the audience to really determine. Yeah. But we do, you know, Jackson may be the protagonist, the sort of main protagonist of the film, but the sort of main hero of the movie is really Gustavo at the end.
Yes.
At the end of this film.
And he's the one who has to make, you know, a choice at the end of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's also, remember, he's, as you said, he's deeply Catholic. He's also, they call him the shepherd, right? You know, it has a Christ-like feel to it. You know, he's being forced to challenge all the religious convictions that he has. Remember, he doesn't want the son to have the knife, right? He guns is not his thing, right? He's just, you know, so you put him in the most impossible place of moral choice, right?
Also, as a father, you gotta, you know, I'm not a father, but you know, Conor is a father of 3 children. You know, I'm obviously very close with my own dad. And I hope that we wrote it in such a way without spelling it out too much, is that Gustavo is in constant conflict again with himself of like, how do I honor my son? Do I honor my son by getting revenge for him, or by not doing that, by being a good man, by saving another kid who has a father? You know, like, what would my son want me to do? You know, especially in the church at his funeral at the end of the movie.
A couple other questions, and we'll take some from the audience because we've got some good ones from the audience. You consciously made a decision to not have a legal proceeding, right? I mean, you could have. You made a decision not to do a kind of, you know, a proverbial or cliche courtroom scene in which a judge pronounces, and in fact, without giving away the ending, it's like an afterthought, you know, the legal remedy. So one question I want to ask is one thing about that. First of all, why did you choose to not give us a legal proceeding a la Law and Order, you know, something that we would expect to see? And two, you know, when it came to the penalty itself, it seems like you were harsher on the American side, because you already said to this audience, to the FOLCS audience, in that situation in no man's land, in a state like a red state like Texas with the castle doctrine in force, meaning you can protect your land. If someone's on your land, you can shoot them. It does seem like you ended up being harder on them. Was that were the Allyn brothers moralizing as to send a message to Americans that we have to be better, that even though we have these rights, that doesn't mean we should necessarily take them? Because I found the whole thing fascinating, the end of the movie. This movie could have been done in, even when Bill tells the rancher the excuse for why he did it, even the rancher's the ranger, I'm sorry, is dubious of that answer, even though most Texans would think it's a perfectly acceptable answer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, to answer the first part of the question about the court, could there have been a courtroom scene, or should we have gone into that? I mean, I think that just goes back to us really trying to focus on a personal story. You know, this movie wasn't about the geopolitics of it all. It was about the personal side of it. And similar with all the criminal aspects that would come into play. Of course, there would have been one. And we talked about that. I remember talking about it with you and Frank on the day of like, okay, what happened since Jackson came home and up to today? What's this?
So you didn't shoot one of those scenes and then drop it.
No.
No, I think we really, on the second part of the question in terms of, you know, are we moralizing and stuff, it does go back to that moral responsibility, taking responsibility. I mean, this is not all spelled out in the script, but in my head, if the Greer family had decided we're going to throw down legally and we're going to, you know, say it was self-defense, they were on our land, they had a knife, whatever, they could have gotten away with it. I think Jackson, had he wanted to, at the end of this movie, could not have served any jail time.
And yet Jackson at the end says to his horse, that's much less than I deserve. Doesn't he say something like that?
Yeah, he does.
And I love that he actually tells his horse, because he's constantly, the only one he can communicate with is his horse the whole movie.
Yeah.
And at the end, the only words that we get about the sentencing, right, about the punishment, come from Jackson to his horse. Again, I've never seen that before.
Way, man.
But I think that's him taking, you know, we don't see this scene in the courtroom or anything like that where he makes a speech to the judge or anything. But I think some point off screen, he's taken responsibility for what he's done. He's not serving a life sentence either, because it's not that cut and dry. He, you know, he's not a motivated murderer.
Yeah. I was also going to say, I always thought it was possible that he was going to jail for, you know, running away from the cops and
like obstructing justice.
You're not allowed to do that.
Is it possible that his 2 years of jail sentence is about that?
Interesting. I love that.
In which that is his technical sentence, you know.
No,
which is I think it's kind of a part of him saying, like, it's less than I deserve. Like, there's an awareness of, like, I could be going to jail for murder right now. And
I like that, Jake. I like that a lot. Last question for me, then we've got some good ones from the audience. When the female rancher, who clearly has a thing for him, there's no question, if No Man's Land sequel comes up part 2, you know what's happening, right? There's no question. He's living there. He takes over the other ranch. Their children. It's lovely. But I love the ending of that moment where she says, by the way, since I don't really, you know, she doesn't really know anything about him other than it was suspicious that the guy knew his name at the bar, Raphael's. She says, I hope you find what you're looking for. Yeah. And I love that he comes back later and he says, I'll see you again, which is a lovely little moment. But do you think would you say that, I mean, it's a nice little wish. Do you think Jackson did in the end find what he was looking for?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, ultimately he was looking for Gustavo, and he just needed to, like, look him in the eyes and put that wallet down. And then I think, I think he was done. Now, was he deathly afraid of dying? Of course. I think you're allowed to be selfish in that moment. And it's impossible not to be anyone who would pretend to, you know, throw themselves at the knees and be open to death, you know, as a 20-year-old kid. It just doesn't seem real to me. But yeah, I think he finds what he's looking for. And I think, you know, hopefully that goes with the ending of the movie when he's back home and goes to prison willfully, and all of that is, I'm good with this. I'm okay with this. And I'm going to come out of this better, hopefully.
Right. And the word again in the restorative justice parlance is reconciled, right? Yeah. He's reconciled. It's a perfect ending, right? You can see it in his face, right? He throws a couple pitches and I'm ready to go. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience, because there's some good ones. First of all, the chairman of our board has a question. He never asks a question, so I have to.
All right, bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on. This is Jeffrey Lenoble, our board chair. He says, I love this question. He says, the movie opened with the scene of the small hilltop of ants. So then he says, did the Wild Bunch, he mentions that, any connection? I was wondering, is the ants like Rosebud? Is there something here that, you know, you're seeing the kind of, you know, like a civilization, right? That,
it's certainly the animals and insects play a large part in this movie, and Jackson's relationship to them and how, you know, what we see in them. Certainly the Wild Bunch, you know, famously opens with a shot of the ants. So when we steal from the best. But of course, yeah, I mean, ants, I think they were great. For one thing, they were just freaking huge red ant hills everywhere we were shooting on this ranch. So we had to get them in there. And yeah, it was in the script.
We're ready.
You know, I think ants are a great motif of, like, they're just ants. And same with the other animals in this movie. We have a great scene with a bull where Jackson encounters a bull from his family ranch that's escaped and run into Mexico. And once Jackson also is lost in Mexico, he encounters this bull that's got a bunch of barbed wire from the fence attached to its leg, and it doesn't know what to do with itself. And animals are ants. They don't know what side of the border they're on. They're just they're living their lives and, you know, oblivious to lines in the sand that we've, you know, drawn. And I think that was kind of the importance of that to the movie, you know, both with the ants and with the bull later on.
Ellen Sackstein asks us, you left Bill's state of mind, his confused feelings about his family, his property, and the trespassing of poor undocumented Mexicans, as well as the criminal trespass, narcos and coyotes. What do you want the audience to take away? Then she says, I loved your film. So she's sort of asking two questions. The first one has to do with the father, right? What do you want to take away from, and then what do you, I guess she's asking broader, what would you like the audience to walk away with?
I think the father's arc, Bill's arc, and which I think Frank Grillo did such a wonderful job of in this movie. One thing that even surprised me was he brought, because I didn't necessarily expect this from him. He's done, he's done a lot of great movies, but he's a tough man of action. He's a tough guy. He's, rough and doesn't get pushed around. And he brought an exceptional amount of vulnerability to the role that even I remember on set being like, he had, I think he might have even added in that line of I don't know what to do anymore. Yeah. Which is this guy who he is. He's all those things. He's rough and he's been out and he works with the cows and he's been holding this ranch together for 20 years or whatever. But he's lost. He's trying. He's turned a little racist over the years because he's got all these problems, and he's got problems coming from all different directions. His way of life is dying. He's sort of part correctly and part incorrectly blaming it on the immigrants cutting through his fences, but he just doesn't know what to do anymore. And he's changed. And Andy McDowell does a great job of this big scene where she reminds him, hey, and this is something Jake pulled right from research of Texas Rangers who in the 80s were these good Christian people living on the border who gave, blankets and water bottles to immigrants when they crossed. But 30 years later, and the problem only getting worse and worse and happening over and over, they've kind of lost their patience and it's changed who they are as people, and not for the better. And Frank and Andy did a great job of this, like, self-reflection, looking back and saying, gosh, this isn't who we used to be. What happened to us? Yeah. And just, they don't know what to do. They're just trying to make it day by day.
I like that. I was thinking about what I asked you earlier was related to that idea about are we being too hard on them? Because, that is just not a pretty story. I love the way you just said, Conor, his way of life is evaporating. We know this in this country with coal miners, right? We've seen, there's so many examples of regional places around the United States where life disappears, and the sense of vulnerability that is experienced when that happens.
Yeah, and people are seeing that on a vast scale in this last year, because all of a sudden, today in Los Angeles, restaurants were able to maybe open a little bit here and there, but it's like all of a sudden your way of life. I have a friend who used to own a couple of gyms in the city, and just like one day he was a successful entrepreneur, and then the next day he had nothing. Yeah. And when you're in that situation, it changes who you are, and it can radicalize you. It can villainize you.
And to go back to the cowboy as well, I mean, those are people that are so used to and take a lot of pride in that their job is it's very hard, but it's very simple. They're going to work their cattle. That's their life. Yeah. And they're okay with that. And it's hard work, but it's easy, and it's easy to do on a daily basis as long as you're willing to put in that hard work. And then you're faced with these issues that you just can't really fix through, grit, and I think for a guy like Bill Greer, that's really hard to come to terms with.
All right, one last question from the audience, and we'll say goodnight to the Allens, and we'll give you some closing remarks. This comes from Nancy Zimmerman. There's an interesting question. It didn't even occur to me. So thank you, Nancy. Did the old couple who were making toys turn Jackson in?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Because their face at the end, the last shot of them in the dark, they seem mortified and anguished, like broken by this, so they did, because I didn't even think about why were what are they called, the Mexican Federals? Like, why were they there?
We had a scene where after Jackson, we cut a couple scenes at the end. We have the scene where you're eating dinner with them and they're offering you food, and then they offer you their bed and they let you sleep in their bedroom. And then we had a little thing of after Jackson's gone to sleep, and they're arguing with one another. Mexico's relationship with the police is even worse than in our country. And normal citizens, don't necessarily, are not going to call the cops on the drop of a hat because they know that it can lead to bad things. And the couple's arguing about whether they should turn him in, that the man wants to and the wife does not. And we decided not to include that for particular reasons, which was to kind of leave it more open. But yes, that was what happened.
Good final question, Nancy. So before we say goodnight to the Allyns, let me just give you some upcoming events and some closing remarks. Let's see, we have an event coming up in a few weeks, right? Where is that, Shervin? There it is, yes. We also have a pandemic book series for the exact same thing, book tours that got stalled because of the pandemic. We're happy to help out. And so we've got this wonderful book. It's so incredibly timely, a field guide to climate anxiety, how to keep your cool on the warming planet. And it's by Sarah Jaquette Kay. And so we have that on February 10th. And we've got a number of other events that we have not yet announced, but they will be announced very soon. So make sure that you're on FOLCS.org and on our mailing list, and you'll see it. Of course, as you all know, we are a nonprofit. Throughout the entire pandemic, we have not charged for any tickets, unlike we normally do when it's live here in New York. So if you're feeling generous, donate to FOLCS. There's two ways to do so. There's a number you can text, and you can go on the website, folks.org/donate. Let's go back to Conor and Jake. Gentlemen, brothers, really, this is quite an achievement. No man's land is something you should really, really be proud of. I know that we're at FOLCS really proud to have been able to present it in the way that it should be presented, and to hear you both so intelligent, so artistically aware of what you did. So, really charming and fun to have here. So we
appreciate being a part of it, being part of the conversation. I think it's really interesting what you guys are doing at FOLCS, and, having these conversations. And that's really what we're trying to do with the movie is not answer any questions, but ask them and get people talking about, the issues in a different way.
Well, it's a work of art, and you gave us a lot to think about, and that's saying a lot. If a person can do that once in a lifetime, that's a pretty big deal, right? A work of art that makes people think and see things in a different way. Audience, you're all out there. There's many of you. Go see this movie. Go to the chat button. It'll show you how to see it. Tell your friends about it. It's first rate. And we're not going to lose track of the Allyns. We're going to remember this. If they get an Oscar, we'll show up that day. And if you have future,
we'll be ready for that.
And when you have future films, call us. We'll obviously showcase you. Thank you both. Say hi to Rob for us. Tell him we missed him. And this is Thane Rosenbaum from FOLCS. We'll see you again. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.